Hey, welcome back, viewers. We are almost back after 2 weeks due to some other responsibility. But yeah, here we back with another interesting video. So we are going to talk about Docker networking. So we have already seen how to containerize an application with the help of Docker. So in this particular video, we are going to talk about how internally Docker networking works, right? So let's first understand the basics of the Docker networking. So whenever we install a Docker in our system, there are three types of network gets installed. So the first network type that gets installed is a bridge, and this is the default network type. So if you, while creating any container, if you don't specify any network, by default, your container gets started on this bridge network. There are other two network types that we hardly use it, but let's discuss that as well. So the other one is host networking, and the third one is a none network. So let's first understand what this host network and none network, and then we'll come back and talk about what is bridge network. So let me just use the different color here quickly. So what is none network? So basically now this is our system, right, where we install a Docker and we are creating a container here. So now this container requires some internet, okay, where if we just run any internet related activity, it will connect to the network and it will fetch something or download something and do something with that data, right? So let's say you are working in a security company where you just need to work with some malicious data, right? So in that case, it's a very risky to basically connect to the internet because it can download any malicious content or it can upload your system data. So we should not allow this kind of application to be executed in the system where we have a network, right? So if that is a requirement, we can use a network type as a none. Basically, if we use a network type as a none, so whatever container we are creating here, that container will not have any kind of a network, right? So even if there is any malicious content, it won't be able to interact with the network. So if we have this kind of a requirement, go ahead and create a container with a none type of a network, but we have to specify it. But if you don't specify any network, by default, it will go and get created on this bridge network, right? So let's talk about the host network. So host network means what? Basically, whatever your host machine in whichever network it is, basically your container will also get a similar network, okay? Or from that same subnet, it will get the network, right? So basically using host network is not recommended. Why so? Because it will use the IP from your system network. And if we do that nowadays, if for everyone is talking about microservices, so for your one application, you might have 30, 40 microservices. And if you're doing that, obviously it is going to consume those such 40 IPs from your host machine network. So this is not recommended. So basically, let's not use that host network, right? So let's talk about the bridge network. So what is meant by bridge network? So basically bridge network is nothing but a kind of it creates one bridge, and that bridge will create one private network, and all the container that gets created, basically they will be inside that private network. So we'll talk more on this bridge network now. So what happens, let me go to the next screen here and I'll use a different color. So now this is our system and on this system, as soon as Docker gets installed, there is one default bridge gets created, and the name of that bridge is Docker 0. Docker 0 is the name of that bridge. Now, as soon as we do this, okay, this Docker 0 is nothing but a default bridge network. So it creates one private subnet, okay, or a private network it creates. And whenever we create any container, so right now, till now, we created multiple networks in our other videos, right? So we created multiple containers and we have not specified any kind of a network there. So when we don't specify a network, by default, it uses this default bridge network, okay? And the name of that network is Docker 0. So all the containers will get connected to this bridge, okay? And to connect your container interface and your bridge, there is one virtual interface also gets created for each such connection. So we are going to see this practically how these containers are connecting to your Docker 0 bridge and what all those virtual interfaces gets created. So let me just quickly show this. So I have already in one EC2 instance where I have a Docker installed. So let me just quickly show you how it looks like. So how to see all the networks? Basically, we have a Docker network ls command. So here you can see these are the 3 networks that gets installed as soon as we install the Docker, right? We talked about none, host, and breach. So if you want to see more about any of this network, what we can do is we can use the command Docker network inspect command we have and a network name. So let's say breach network. So if I just run it, you can see there is a lot of information we got it. So specifically, you can see this is the network name, the network ID, when it got created. Okay, so what is the IPM driver? IPM basically is nothing but a IP address management. So it's using a default IP address management driver. You can see what subnet it is using, what is the gateway, and more importantly, right now the container section. So right now there is no container running on this particular network. So that's why it is saying empty. So as soon as we create any container, automatically that container entry will be able to see it here, right? Now, apart from this, if I just run the ifconfig command, basically it will list out all the networks we have on the interface side. So here you can see this ETH0 is this particular EC2 instance interface. Okay, but more importantly for us is a Docker 0 breach. So this Docker 0 breach got created as soon as we install the Docker. Okay, so the breach network, when we are talking, that is nothing but this Docker 0 breach we are talking about, right? So there is no virtual interface right now, it is listing. Why so? Because there is no container running. So let me just quickly create one container and I'll show you all this network information. So Docker run command we use to create a container, -d is to run the container in the background mode, and then some name to that container, I'll just give it as C1. Okay, and then for some port binding, so I'm going to use the Redis image. Redis is a Redis cache database. So I'll just use it. So let's say I'm binding it to the 5000 port and it runs on 6379 and the container image. So I'm using a Redis image, the latest version. So let me just run it. So I had already image, so it started directly a container. So if I just do Docker PS, you can see container is running, right? So let's see the networking related stuff. First of all, I'm doing ifconfig. So you can see there is one virtual interface got created. Why this virtual interface got created? Because we have a container now. To connect that container and your host machine, the breach, we need a virtual interface in between. So that's what this virtual interface got created, right? Now let me do it. Docker network inspect a breach network, right? We talked about this breach network. So let's talk about this. So if I just inspect it now, here you can see now this is a container entry. You can see now we have a container called C1 and that container got this particular IP 172.17.0.2, right? So now if I just keep creating a multiple containers, every container will get the next IP, next available IP, like 172.17.0.2. This container got so 0.3, 0.4, 0.5. This way we'll keep getting the further IPs. As soon as the container gets deleted, this IP gets released and allocated for some new container, right? So this is how, this was what was happening whenever we are creating a container, right? So now the next question is, can we create our own custom network? Okay, if we can, then why it is what is the need of this such network? So let's talk about it. Let me go to the whiteboard. So first of all, the rule here is, now let's say consider this is a C1 and this is a C2, right? So the container from the same bridge network, they can talk to each other by simply using a port. They can talk to each other by simply using a port. So why we should create a custom network? So the first question is why we should create a custom network. So the reason behind is basically now, just now we talked like content from the same network, they can directly talk to each other by using port, right? So here the question comes about the security, right? So now let's say your application have a 40 microservice, right? Now out of that 40 microservices, maybe 5 are some database related microservice, 5 are business logic related microservice, 5 are your front end related microservice, right? So there is no point of just putting all this microservice on a one network. If you do that, there is a risk of security. If one of your container get compromised due to some vulnerability, there are high chances that your hacker can reach to all the other containers as well. So to avoid that, we should group containers, okay, which are interacting with each other. We should group them, and then every such group we should deploy it on a separate network, right? So that is where the need of your custom network. So container from one network cannot connect with a container from other network. We have a mechanism for that, but directly they won't be able to do it. So that's why, to give a more security to that, we should create a multiple custom networks, and then depending on what group they belongs, we can just create the containers on that network. So how we can do that and how it looks like, let me just explain with another diagram. So let's say this is our system. And what we have seen is just now, we have one Docker zero breach, and this Docker zero breach has its own network. Okay, and on that we have some containers. So let's take an example that we have container C1 and container C2. Both these are running on this Docker zero breach. So they have one interface, and through virtual interface they are connecting. So VATH 0 maybe and VATH 1. So with this virtual interface, it is connecting to the your default bridge network, right? So what we can do is, we can similar the way we have a Docker zero, we can create our own custom bridge as well. So let's take an example as a Minet. So obviously, so Minet, we can give our own range for our network, and so it will create its own private network. So now we can create a containers inside this. So how we can do it, we'll see that practically. So let's consider we create this two containers now. Let's say C3 and C4, right? So again, they connect with the Minet via some virtual interface. Let's say VATH2 and VATH3, right? So it's connecting to the interfaces of C1 and C3. So C3 and C4. So C3 and C4, they can talk to each other by simply using the ports. Similarly, C1 and C2 can talk to each other, right? So this is how you can just group the multiple containers and put it on a different network. Now the next question is, what if the container from one network wants to talk to the container in other network? So we have a provision for that, but by default they won't be able to talk, okay, because they are completely in a different networks. So just now we have seen this Docker 0 has some network range like 172.17.0.0/16. So this is the range. And for this network, we can give our own range. Let's say I'm giving something like this, 192.168.0.0/16. So maybe for this C3, we'll get the something like 192.168.0.2. Here we'll get the 0.3. This is the IPs we are getting. Similarly, here also we'll get something like 172.17.0.2 and 0.3. So this way they will get the IP. So obviously this two will have a completely different IP range, so they will not be able to talk to each other. So let me first show you whether they are really able to talk to each other or not, and then I'll show you the way how we can do that, right? So let's go back to our system. So right now you can see here, we have the container C1. So what I'll do, I'll just go back and create another container in the default network itself. So we already know like why I should change the port here. So I'm just using the container 2. Okay, so that means I'm just creating another container on the same default network itself. So let me do that. It got created. If I go back and just inspect the bridge network, you can see this time another container C2 got created, and this got IP 0.3, right? So they can talk to each other. Okay, if I just wanted to show you, let me just log into one of the container, docker exec -it. I'm using a C1 and then bash. Okay, so we are inside this C1 container. So what is the IP of the C2? So let's try to reach to this IP. Okay, first of all, let me just do the if config. Okay, so if config is not available inside this image, but yeah, let's install it. So I can do apt install. So to install if config, we need to use nettools. This is the utility we need to install. What happened? Okay, it's not able to, not allowing me to install. Let me just do apt update here. So it's doing an apt update. Now once apt update is done, we should be able to do net install. So if I do if config, so here you can see there is a right now one interface and it has this particular IP, right? So let me just try to ping it. Ping. What is the IP of other container? It's 172.17.0.3, right? So let me just remove this extra stuff. Okay, perfect. So I'm just pinging. Okay, so again, ping utility is not there. Let's install. So apt install IP utils -ping is the package name that we need to use it to install the ping, right? So it's getting installed. So it's done. Now let's try to ping it. And you can see here we go. So that means now C1 and C2, they are able to talk to each other. They can simply ping to each other because they are reachable and they are in the same network. Now let's do one thing. Let's see how to create another network. Okay, and how to create a container on that network, and then how they can talk to each other. Let's talk about it quickly. So let me come out of the network. So how to create other network? It's a very simple. We have few commands like docker network create. Okay, what is the name of the network? Let's say MyNet. And then you can provide a subnet as well. Okay, so let's provide the subnet as 192.168.0.0/16. Very simple. What happened? Okay, it's just a spelling mistake. Subnet. Perfect. So network got created. Where you can find it? Docker network ls. So you can see the fourth network that MyNet is got created. If you want to see more information about this network, just do Docker network inspect MyNet. So if you do it, we got inspect. So when it got, so all the information is there. More importantly, this is the subnet, and right now the container section is empty, right? So this is what we have we just created this container right now. So let's create a container on this network. So how to create it? So very small changes. So first of all, I'm just giving this container name as a C3, and I'll just run it on a 5002 port. And then if you don't provide the network, by default, it gets created on the bridge network. But if you want to create on some custom network, we have to use -- network section. Okay, -- network. And what is the network name? MyNet. That's it. Now this time, if we just create, this container will get created on the MyNet network. Let's see that. Go back and just inspect MyNet. And here we go. Now this C3 is running on 0. C3 is running on MyNet network, and it got the IP 192.168.0.2, right? Perfect. So now we created a custom network, we created a container on that. So what is the IP of this container? 192.168.0.2, right? So let's see if we can reach from that C1 container to this C3, right? So just now we logged into the C1, right? So let's log in again. So I logged into the C1 and I'm just trying to ping this. Okay. So here you can see I'm just trying to ping the container which is there in the MyNet network, but that is not possible. We are not able to reach it, right? So that something is not allowed. That's why we are not able to reach it, right? But what if, okay, so right now what we have seen is we have a C1 and C2 on Docker 0 and we created a C3. So we have seen that these two are able to talk to each other, but when we try to ping it from C1 to C3, that's not feasible. So how we can make our C3 accessible to C1 as well? Okay, so in that case, what option we have is basically we can connect. Okay, let's say we have a requirement where we want a C1 to talk to C3. Okay, the container from the MyNet network. So in that case, we can connect our C1. Okay, let me just use a different color here. So we can make this C1 to be available on both the network. Okay, so it will, another interface will be created for C1. Okay, and now that interface will be connected to the MyNet via another virtual interface, let's say VET4. Okay, so this is what we can do is once we do this, we'll have a two interface on this C1. One interface which is connected to Docker 0, one interface which is connected to MyNet. So now if C1 wants to talk to C3, so the traffic will go this way. If C1 wants to talk to the C2, traffic will come to the Docker 0 and it will go to C2, right? So this is how the communication is going to happen. So let's see how we can do this practically quickly. So let me come out of it and doing or connecting your container to other network. It's very simple. What we need to do is Docker network. We have a connect command. What do you want to connect? We want to connect a MyNet network to our container C1. That's it. If you do it, it's done. Now, if you just go inside the C1 container and do the if config, this time you can see the another interface got created ETH1, and this ETH1 interface got the IP from the MyNet network, that is 0.3 IP, we got it, right? So now if you just go back and try to ping 0.2, the other container we tried earlier, so we are able to ping it, right? So this is how we can make our container accessible for other network as well. But this is only if we required it. Otherwise, we can simply make our container secure from one network to another network, right? So this is a very important concept of the Docker networking, right? So I hope everyone understood the Docker networking part, where we quickly discussed about what all the default behavior or what are the default networks we have. What is the default bridge network, how it works, okay, how the container gets created, how they get the IP, how the IP gets released, then how we can create, what is the need of custom network, how we can create it, how we can deploy a container on that. So all this we have seen. So I hope everyone understood this Docker networking concept. So if you like this video, please like video, comment, and share with your friends. So thanks everyone for watching, and please subscribe the channel.